Why don't America's drug addicts quit doing drugs? Firstly, what are drugs? Drugs are the medicine or other substances which has a physiological effect when ingested or otherwise introduced into the body. Drugs are the secret economic booster that no one chooses to talk about. Drugs are the takers of over 72,000 American lives in 2017 alone. We have all seen or heard about someone suffering from the effects of drugs. Ask yourself, what have you actively done to try to help these people? Some may have actually actively tried to help these people, but the majority, including the American government, has turned a blind eye to these people suffering from the disease we call addiction. This claim may be surprising because of America's spending habits. This year alone, the United States has spent over $29 billion fighting the war on drugs, and in 2019, their budget is expected to rise to almost $30 billion. Has this spending actually been useful? No. From 2002 to 2012, there was an increase of over 4 million people from the ages of 12 and up admitting to using an illicit drugs. Now, 13.2% of Americans use illicit drugs. People repeatedly suffering from the effects and the pull of illegal drugs are called drug addicts. Drug addiction is a serious disease that requires time, doctors, and a strong support network. These things are expensive, so of course the United States government isn't supportive of the efforts. Instead, the United States has created a culture of fear towards drugs, and people suffering from drug addiction have no one to turn to. We as a society have turned victims of drug abuse into the culprits. Drug addicts continue to stay hooked on drugs because the American government has created a culture of fear surrounding getting medical attention to stop their addictions. This needs to change, and here's how to do it. To state an obvious point, people are always going to do drugs. The high from drugs is nearly irresistible in places like parties or even in everyday walks of life. There is no possible way to completely rid the country of drugs or to stop everyone from doing drugs instantly. Prohibition has never worked in any country or in any era. Now, America has not been the only country with a serious drug problem. As a final resort to a political and drug crisis, Portugal tried their very last option called the Portugal Experiment. The Portugal Experiment was in 2001. Portugal decriminalized all drugs and turned their attitudes towards treating people in possession of drugs or addicted to drugs in need of medical attention instead of criminals. 14 years later, this radical last result has turned out fantastically. Portugal has dropped from 12% of its population using illicit drugs regularly and 1% of the population being addicted to heroin to only 4% of the population using illegal drugs, most being Schedule 3 through 5, which means they are the least harmful or addictive drugs. Now, this tactic may work in America, but due to the size of American population and the tendency of Americans to rebel and abuse privileges like this experiment probably would not work. The best solution to treating a drug addiction problem in America is supervised drug consumption facilities. Supervised drug consumption facilities, where illicit drugs can be used under the supervision of trained staff, have been operating in Europe for the past 3 decades. These facilities primarily aim to reduce the acute risk of disease transmission through unhygienic injecting, as well as preventing drug-related overdose deaths. Typically, drug consumption rooms provide drug users with sterile injecting equipment, counseling services before, during, and after use, emergency care in the event of overdose, and primary medical care and referral to the appropriate social health care and addiction treatment services. It reduces discarded needles in public places while keeping the addict a little safer. The ultimate goal being to keep the door open to help the addict find rehabilitation. These facilities do not get people hooked on drugs. Rather, they open up a reasonable and attainable process to overcoming people's drug addictions. Opening up more service like this in America will reduce the fear surrounding drugs and allow for more receptive attitudes for drug addicts to actively seek help in recovery. America needs to start treating drug addiction like the disease it is instead of the crime people think it is. Thank you.